My beloved child, pause here for a moment. Do not rush past these words as though they are just another message appearing before your eyes. Something has been unfolding quietly behind the scenes of this story, and what you are about to hear changes the meaning of everything that seemed confusing before. Someone spoke about you when you were not there. Someone placed doubt into the heart of the person who cared about you. They were told to stay away from you, to question what they felt, and to be careful about allowing you too close. For a little while, those words worked. Your soulmate began wondering whether the connection they felt could be trusted. But what the person who warned them never expected was this: the truth would eventually speak louder than the warning. There was a moment when your soulmate sat alone and replayed that conversation in their mind. They remembered the seriousness in the other person's voice. They remembered being told that there was supposedly something about you they did not understand. The warning sounded convincing because it arrived wrapped in certainty. And certainty can be powerful when someone is already afraid of being hurt. Your soulmate wanted to believe their own heart, yet another voice had planted a question there: what if I am seeing this person incorrectly? That question did not immediately push them away from you, but it made them watch more carefully. It made them notice details. It made them examine your actions instead of simply trusting what anyone said. And strangely, my child, that was the beginning of the warning destroying itself. Because the closer they looked, the less the story they had been told made sense. They expected to find manipulation, yet they kept noticing sincerity. They expected inconsistency, yet they began recognizing quiet patterns of loyalty. They expected your kindness to disappear whenever there was nothing for you to gain, but instead they noticed that some of your most genuine actions happened when nobody was watching. And this created a conflict inside them. The warning had painted one picture of you, but reality was slowly painting another. At first they tried to ignore the contradiction. They told themselves they needed more time. They told themselves emotions could make people overlook obvious signs. But somewhere deep inside, another realization was beginning to form, and once it formed, it became impossible to silence. The person who warned them had described you through assumptions. Your soulmate was beginning to know you through experience. That difference became everything. My beloved child, there are truths about a person that cannot be understood through rumors. Character reveals itself in small moments. It appears in how someone behaves when they are disappointed. It appears in how they treat people who cannot offer them anything. It appears in whether they keep their dignity when misunderstood. And your soulmate began noticing something that unsettled the entire warning they had received: you were not desperately trying to prove yourself. You were simply being yourself. You were not performing goodness for applause. You were not chasing them around demanding that they recognize your value. Even when something felt different between you, even when their energy seemed uncertain, there remained something steady about you. They noticed it. Perhaps you wondered why they became quieter. Perhaps you sensed a distance you could not explain. Maybe conversations seemed slightly different. Maybe something that once felt warm suddenly carried hesitation. Within this fictional story, imagine how confusing that would have felt. You standing on one side of a silence without knowing that somebody else's words were echoing on the other side. You could not defend yourself against a conversation you had never heard. You could not answer accusations nobody had spoken directly to you. And yet something remarkable was happening inside that silence. Your soulmate was gathering their own evidence, not because you asked them to, but because their heart could no longer accept someone else's version of you without examining it. Then came the first discovery. It was not dramatic. There was no thunder, no grand confrontation, no sudden confession. It was something small, almost ordinary. Your soulmate learned about something kind you had done without expecting recognition for it. Maybe it was the way you helped someone. Maybe it was a promise you quietly kept. Maybe it was the way you protected another person's dignity instead of exposing their weakness. Whatever the exact moment was in this story, it contradicted something they had been told about you. Your soulmate froze emotionally because now they had a choice. They could dismiss what they had discovered, or they could begin questioning the warning itself. They chose to question. And once someone begins questioning a false impression, every forgotten detail returns differently. Your soulmate started remembering conversations with you. They remembered moments when you could have chosen the selfish response but did not. They remembered the way you listened. They remembered something you said casually that suddenly carried deeper meaning. They remembered how you reacted when plans changed, when emotions became complicated, when there was nothing glamorous about the moment. These memories began lining up like pieces of a puzzle. One piece alone could be dismissed. Two pieces could be coincidence. But when enough pieces began fitting together, your soulmate could no longer pretend they were seeing nothing. The warning had told them to fear your intentions. Your actions were revealing your heart. And my child, this is where the story becomes deeper, because your soulmate did not immediately feel relieved. They felt guilty. They began wondering whether their caution had hurt you. They wondered whether you noticed the change in their behavior. They remembered moments when you may have deserved warmth but received hesitation instead. They remembered times when you reached toward them emotionally and they held something back because another person's warning was still sitting in their mind. And suddenly the question was no longer, "Can I trust this person?" It became, "What if I almost pushed away someone genuine because I trusted the wrong voice?" That question followed them into the quiet hours. They could not shake it. Your soulmate began examining the source of the warning more carefully. Why had this person been so determined to create distance between you? What exactly did they know? Had they personally witnessed something troubling, or were they repeating assumptions? Why had they spoken with such confidence about someone they did not truly understand? These questions had not occurred to your soulmate in the beginning because fear rarely asks for evidence before entering the heart. But now that fear was weakening, logic returned. And the answers were uncomfortable. The person who warned your soulmate had not known nearly as much about you as they pretended to know. Some of their certainty had been built on fragments. A misunderstanding here. An assumption there. Something heard from someone else. Something interpreted without context. Perhaps even their own past experiences projected onto you. Your soulmate began realizing that the warning was not necessarily born from truth. It may have been born from someone's perception of truth, and those are not always the same thing. That realization changed the atmosphere completely. My beloved child, sometimes people judge unfamiliar hearts using old wounds as measuring tools. Someone who has been deceived before may become suspicious of mystery. Someone who has experienced abandonment may interpret independence as rejection. Someone who has seen manipulation may mistake confidence for control. People often believe they are reading another person when they are actually reading the pages of their own history. And in this story, the person who warned your soulmate may have been looking at you through a lens shaped by experiences that had nothing to do with you. Your soulmate started seeing this. But there was still something they did not know. Something much bigger. There was one detail about you that had been misunderstood from the beginning. One part of your character that looked completely different from the outside than it actually felt on the inside. Your silence had been mistaken for secrecy. Your boundaries had perhaps been mistaken for coldness. Your strength had been interpreted as emotional distance. The warning had taken something complex about you and given it the simplest, darkest explanation. Yet your soulmate was about to discover the reason behind it. And when they did, their entire perspective shifted. They learned that some of the walls around your heart were not built because you had nothing to give. They existed because what you give matters deeply to you. You had learned not to hand your trust to every person who asked for it. You had learned that being loving does not require being careless with yourself. There were chapters behind your calmness that others could not see. There were moments when you had needed support and still found a way to keep moving. There were times when you carried responsibilities quietly because you did not want to burden everyone around you. There were disappointments you survived without turning your pain into cruelty. And your soulmate had not known the full story. The more they discovered, the more their hearts softened. Suddenly, things they once questioned about you became understandable. They realized why you sometimes needed time before opening up. They understood why loyalty mattered so much to you. They began seeing that your caution was not evidence of dishonesty. In many moments, it was evidence that you took emotional connection seriously. You were not withholding yourself because you wanted to play games. You were protecting something you had learned was precious. This realization touched them more deeply than they expected. Because now they were not simply discovering that the warning was inaccurate. They were discovering that you had been misunderstood. And there is something profoundly emotional about realizing that someone you nearly judged had been carrying a story you never knew. Your soulmate began remembering the way you handled being misunderstood. You did not launch a campaign to make everyone choose your side. You did not expose people simply to make yourself look innocent. You did not demand that everyone believe you immediately. There was something almost mysterious about your restraint. Perhaps you knew that character eventually introduces itself. Perhaps you had learned that truth does not always need to shout. That restraint became one of the strongest pieces of evidence in your favor. Your soulmate thought, if everything I was warned about were true, why does reality keep showing me something different? That was the moment their loyalty began shifting away from the warning and toward their own experience. But they still needed to know more. So they quietly started asking questions. Not interrogations. Not dramatic confrontations. Small questions. Careful observations. They listened when your name appeared in conversation. They paid attention to how different people described you. They began comparing stories. And something strange happened. People who had actually spent meaningful time around you tended to describe qualities that did not match the warning. They spoke about your resilience, your kindness, your determination, your ability to remain composed when life became difficult. Some remembered moments you probably assumed nobody noticed. Your soulmate noticed those stories. Every one of them chipped away at the original doubt. Then one particular conversation changed everything. Someone mentioned a moment from your past. It was not necessarily some enormous secret. It was simply something revealing about your character. They described a situation where you could have chosen resentment but chose maturity. A moment when nobody would have blamed you for walking away bitter, yet somehow you did not allow disappointment to define you. Your soulmate listened carefully, and while the other person continued speaking, a realization began forming inside them. They had been told you were dangerous to their peace. But what they were discovering was someone who had fought hard to create peace within themselves. Those are completely different stories. My child, imagine the weight of that realization. Your soulmate went quiet afterward. Not because they doubted you anymore, but because they were beginning to doubt themselves. They wondered why the warning had affected them so strongly. They wondered whether fear had been louder than intuition. They wondered how close they had come to allowing someone else's opinion to decide something their own heart should have been allowed to discover naturally. And then another thought entered their mind. What if they know I doubted them? That thought hurt. Your soulmate suddenly imagined the situation from your perspective. Imagine caring for someone while sensing them slowly withdrawing. Imagine not knowing why. Imagine wondering whether you had done something wrong. Imagine searching through recent conversations for some mistake you could not find. They realized that their uncertainty may have created uncertainty inside you too. For the first time, they wanted to explain everything. But something stopped them. Not pride. Fear. They were afraid that telling you about the warning would create another wound. They worried you would ask who said it. They worried you would feel betrayed that they listened. They worried you might look at them differently after learning how easily doubt had entered their mind. And so your soulmate became caught between two desires. The desire to tell you the truth and the desire to protect the connection from the consequences of that truth. But secrets become heavy when love is involved. And this one was becoming unbearable. My beloved child, while all of this unfolded, something else was changing. Your soulmate's feelings were becoming stronger precisely because they had been forced to examine them. Before the warning, perhaps they simply knew they cared about you. After the warning, they had to ask themselves why. They had to examine what they valued about you. They had to separate attraction from trust, curiosity from connection, fantasy from reality. And after questioning everything, something remained. You. Not an imaginary version of you. Not the version described by the warning. You. The person they had actually experienced. That realization frightened them in a different way because now losing you felt possible. They understood that while they were standing back and evaluating you, you were still living your life. You were still growing. You were still moving forward. You were not guaranteed to wait forever while someone decided whether you were worthy of trust. And suddenly your soulmate realized something they had overlooked: you also had a choice. You could choose them. Or you could eventually choose peace without them. That possibility awakened something inside their heart. The distance that once felt safe suddenly felt dangerous. They began wanting to move closer. They wanted to hear your voice differently. They wanted to understand the things you rarely explained. They wanted to know what made you laugh when nobody else was around, what dreams you kept private, what experiences shaped your standards, what kind of future you imagined when you were not trying to impress anyone. The warning had ironically pushed them into a deeper curiosity about your soul. But there was still one final piece missing. Why had that person warned them in the first place? Your soulmate had assumed it came from concern. But after everything they had discovered, that explanation no longer felt complete. Something about the original conversation began bothering them. A particular phrase. A strange intensity. The way the person seemed almost personally invested in keeping distance between you. Your soulmate replayed it again. And again. Then they remembered something. A tiny detail they had overlooked. The person giving the warning had asked an unusual question about you before they ever advised your soulmate to stay away. At the time, the question seemed harmless. Now it did not. Your soulmate began connecting another set of dots. What if the warning had never been entirely about protecting them? What if there had been another emotion underneath it? Jealousy? Misunderstanding? Personal bias? A hidden history? Fear of losing influence? Your soulmate did not know yet, and they refused to accuse anyone without understanding the truth. But something had changed. Instead of investigating you, they now found themselves investigating the warning. And that is when the balance of the entire story turned. The person who once planted doubt was suddenly the person whose motives were being questioned. Your soulmate remembered how quickly they had changed the subject whenever something positive about you came up. They remembered a strange expression once crossing that person's face when your soulmate spoke warmly about you. They remembered comments that had seemed protective at first but now sounded strangely possessive. Still, they needed proof. And soon, proof arrived in a form nobody expected. Not through confrontation. Not through spying. Through a simple accidental revelation. Someone said something they did not realize your soulmate already knew. It exposed a contradiction. One detail did not match the original warning. Then another detail surfaced. Your soulmate remained quiet, allowing the conversation to continue. And the more they listened, the clearer it became that the person who warned them had left out an important part of the story. A very important part. Your soulmate felt their heartbeat change because they suddenly understood that the warning had not been a complete lie, but it had not been the complete truth either. Certain facts had been arranged in a way that made you appear different from who you really were. Context had been removed. Intentions had been assumed. And one crucial fact had been deliberately, or perhaps conveniently, left unspoken. That fact changed everything. Your soulmate left the conversation carrying a mixture of anger, relief, regret, and something even stronger, determination. They no longer wanted opinions about you. They wanted truth from you. They wanted to sit across from you and hear your side without interruption. They wanted to ask the questions they should have asked from the beginning. They wanted to admit that someone had influenced their perception. They wanted to apologize for every moment when their fear may have made you feel unwanted. But before they could reach you, another revelation appeared. And this one was about something you had done for them. Something you never told them. Something that proved your intentions more clearly than any explanation ever could. Your soulmate discovered that at a moment when you could have protected your own image, you had instead protected theirs. You had been given an opportunity to defend yourself by revealing something private about them, but you chose silence because their dignity mattered more to you than winning an argument. When they learned this, they could barely process it. You had allowed yourself to be misunderstood rather than embarrass someone you cared about. And suddenly every accusation against your character felt painfully small. Your soulmate sat with that truth for a long time. They thought about how rare it is to find someone who protects another person's dignity even while hurting. They thought about how easily you could have exposed everything. They thought about how you could have forced the truth into the open, yet you had chosen patience. Their eyes filled with emotion. Not because they believed you were perfect, but because they finally understood your heart. And my beloved child, this is where the story reaches the doorway of something extraordinary. Because your soulmate was no longer asking whether they should stay away from you. They were asking how to come closer without losing the chance they almost threw away. They began forming the words they wanted to say. They imagined looking into your eyes and admitting everything. They imagined telling you who warned them, what was said, what they believed, what they discovered, and why they now regretted ever allowing another person's voice to become louder than their own experience with you. But before that conversation could happen, your soulmate received one final piece of information. A message. A name. And a truth about the person who had warned them. They stared at it. Read it once. Then twice. Their entire expression changed. Because suddenly they understood why that person had been so determined to keep them away from you. And the real reason had almost nothing to do with what they originally claimed. Your soulmate whispered your name under their breath. Everything connected. The warning. The distance. The missing context. The strange questions. The hidden motive. And what your soulmate discovered next was so unexpected that instead of walking away from you, they made a decision that would bring them closer to you than they had ever dared to come before. But there was one thing they still did not know. You had already discovered part of the truth yourself. And you were about to make a decision of your own.